In hindsight, it's easy to write off creepypasta as just a landfill of angsty teenage ramblings and awful fanfiction. Countless stories plagued by boring, cliche, and at times unintentionally hilarious writing. Creepypastas honestly don't get the credit they deserve though. They had a massive impact on horror, writing, books, and pop culture in general. And while you might want to scoff at that due to the absolute treasures given to us like Sonic.exe or Jeff the Killer, the absolute magnum opus of too edgy for me, there's much more to creepypasta and its impact that seems to be mostly ignored. Despite all the cringe, most of this impact can be found in many of the early stories and chain letters that started the genre. And even at the expense of any semblance of credibility that I might have, I want to talk about why classic creepypasta mattered. Creepypasta came to be during a time when the horror genre was at an all-time low. Spawned originally from chain texts and emails and short copy and pasted stories on message boards, things that make me feel old talking about. The name itself came from the term copy-pasta, aka memes in text format.
What the fuck did you just fucking say about me, you little bitch? I'll have you know, I graduated top of my class in the Navy SEALs, and I've been involved in numerous secret raids in Al-Qaeda, and I have over 300 confirmed kills!
In the mid to late 2000s, when creepypasta was in its infancy, horror media was in a pretty rough spot. Most horror games were just creepy-themed action games. Horror films were either god-awful remakes, jump scare fests, or Paranormal Activity. And while I wasn't very aware of what was going on in the world of horror literature at the time, I'll let the mass closing of bookstores speak for itself as to where things were in the literary world. The creation of the Creepypasta Wiki, SCP Foundation, 4chan's X-Board, and the subreddit r/nosleep created a perfect storm of similar and adjacent online horror movements that ushered in a massive growth and popularity for the greater creepypasta phenomena. And while I know some fat nerd is going to be upset that I grouped these all together, outside the SCP Foundation, which developed its own entity, they all kind of existed together and fostered the same large community of online horror writers and readers. The now iconic and infamous characters like Jeff the Killer, Slender Man, Smiledog, and even the Rake got their start with many having multiple stories written about them, showing different interpretations of these characters, many of which were spawned by creepy pictures posted on the web at the time. And look, I know it's easy to look back and think, wow, we were actually scared of this? But at the time, there was nothing like them. And most of the people who enjoyed them were much younger and not seasoned horror fans. This, coupled with the fact that the expectation of quality with the medium didn't really exist yet, yeah, it all checked out. Many of these old creepypastas varied in their style, quality, and subject matter, for better or for worse. Personally, I believe that's part of the charm that they had and why so many got invested. Soon, YouTube channels, podcasts, and forums centered around creepypastas, SCPs, and online horror stories in general began to pop up, fostering and growing the communities that enjoyed them. And this is when the era of classic, mediocre creepypastas started to fizzle out, and more professionally and written material began to surface. The ARG epic Ben Drowned and long but fantastic NES Godzilla, using screenshots and gameplay videos to boost their immersive atmosphere, were truly genre-defining and groundbreaking for the time, showing creepypasta wasn't just a bunch of memes, but something to really take note of. Now, before we go forward, spoiler warning for all the stories I'm about to cover.
Big scare for a young girl today who fell into an open manhole while she was walking to school this morning.
She stood in about a foot of rushing water calling for her mom.
Carmen Winstead, also known as They Pushed Her, is more than just a classic creepypasta. It's one of the internet's oldest horror stories and originated as a chain letter all the way back in 2006, primarily being spread through text, email, AOL, and MySpace. The fuck is AOL? The image most associated with the story didn't start being included until 2008. The story itself is a short and sweet one, like most old creepypasta, and it went a little something like this. She was pushed. About 6 years ago in Indiana, Carmen Winstead was pushed down a sewer opening by 5 girls in her school. trying to embarrass her in front of her school during a fire drill. When she didn't submerge, the police were called. They went down and brought up 17-year-old Carmen Winstead's body. The neck broke hitting the ladder, then side concrete at the bottom. The girls told everyone she fell. They believed them. 2 months ago, 16-year-old David Gregory read this post and didn't repost it. When he went to take a shower, he heard laughter from his shower. He started freaking out and ran to his computer to repost it. He said goodnight to his mom and went to sleep. 5 hours later, his mom woke up in the middle of the night because of a loud noise. David was gone. That morning, a few hours later, the police found him in the sewer. His neck broke and his face skin peeled off. Gotta love the typos and poor grammar of the mid-2000s. Obviously, whoever wrote this really liked J-horror, or they watched The Ring that weekend. But regardless, they took the necessary elements needed to make a short, creepy little story. And while I know some of you are looking in hindsight, and you might scoff at this, just imagine being a teenager in 2006, just to get a text from a random number with this story and warning of a curse, all while this is staring at you. The chain letter was a smashing success and made the rounds so much that it even led to the cringe factory known as Snopes writing an article debunking it, because the story itself had become almost a modern urban legend, and that's honestly what made it infectious. Believe the letter or not, the idea of a curse through text was chilling and fun. Carmen Winstead went on to inspire many more scary chain letters, awarding itself a place in internet history. The story was even written to be much longer and more fleshed out years later, although it made it even worse.
Hi, my name is Carmen Winstead. I'm 17 years old. And
Jeff was rolling around on the ground, half set on fire.
If you want to talk about iconic and influential, you have to bring up Jeff the Killer. The story is one of the most well-known out of any in the creepypasta world. The story behind the image goes back way further than most would think as well. But discussing that in all its glory would take an entire video, so let me give you the Cliff Notes version. For a long time, it's been argued where the origins of the Jeff the Killer image came from, being traced back as far as 2005, with the image being frequently posted on the Japanese image board 2 channel. It's also rumored that it's an edited picture of an obese woman who was being bullied on 4chan back in 2006, though the earliest verified use of this image comes from a Japanese horror video posted on YouTube back in 2007. So we're just going to say that this is the origin of the image for now, but for a deeper dive, check out Blame It on Jorge's video. The actual Jeff the Killer story was posted originally to newgrounds.com in 2008, before being taken down and later reposted in a slightly different form in 2009 to the Creepypasta wiki. And while Jeff the Killer might be a poorly written story with some of the dumbest situations and plot points imaginable, back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, it was kind of amazing. Most readers of Creepypasta were middle schoolers and early teenagers, so as poorly written as it was, most people just didn't care. Notes of the story go as follows. 13-year-old Jeff and his little brother Lou moved to a new town and quickly end up making enemies with some local bullies. After kicking their asses to the curb and a bit of knife practice from Jeff, the little brother Lou is sentenced to a year in jail when he takes full blame for the fight. Jeff, like most kids in his situation, falls into a deep fog of depression and guilt. After a few days pass, his parents force him to go to a little kid's birthday party. And after an intense game of cowboys, the 3 bullies from the beginning jump the fence and try to get their revenge on Jeff. When the adults try to intervene, they pull out guns, and all the parents just let the chaos ensue. Jeff gets into an intense fight with one of the bullies, and they somehow end up going up the stairs and into the bathroom, where a bully breaks a bottle of vodka over his head, with both falling and knocking over a cabinet, spilling bleach on themselves. The bully then goes full Joker mode, pulling out a lighter and setting both him and Jeff on fire. Jeff wakes up in the hospital weeks later, horribly disfigured with bleached skin and third-degree burns. After completely snapping and going nuts, the hospital decides it's a good idea to send him home with his family, where he then proceeds to kill both his parents and run away. That's a teen edgelord fantasy if I've ever heard one. And with that, I'm sure it's clear as to why this story is so infamous, to the point where it's now looked upon as a shitpasta. Despite this though, the story became hugely popular in the early 2010s with multiple sequels, spin-offs, and crossovers to other creepypasta characters being written about him. Though, on a personal note, I think the main thing that carried the story was the admittedly creepy picture of Jeff, and the fact that the Marilyn Manson song Sweet Dreams served as his theme song. This all culminated in Jeff becoming insanely popular and becoming one of the faces of creepypasta. But something I do think that actually helped the scare factor of the story was that back in the day, if you looked up Jeff the Killer on Google, the only info outside of the creepypasta that popped up was a real murderer named Jeff, adding just a semblance of credibility to an otherwise fucking ridiculous story. But in 2015, writer Banning K rewrote the story and turned it into a full-fledged crime series that's actually pretty fantastic, and I highly recommend it. If this picture didn't haunt your adolescence, then you missed out. Smiledog.jpg is one of the few classic creepypastas that actually broke the mold of terrible, cringy edge posting and was a good story. It's also a 2-for-1 special since the picture itself was such nightmare fuel. It transcended from just being a story and became a chain letter as well, to the benefit of the story actually, since it's about a haunted picture file. The original creepypasta originated sometime during 2008 on 4chan's X board. The definitive narration of the story was actually done pretty recently by 10 Bond, so if you're curious, check out his video. But to give you a synopsis, it's about an independent journalist who's doing research into an urban legend known as Smiledog. He attempts to interview a woman named Mary, who in the past worked as an administrator for a Chicago-based BPS back in 1992. And this is one of the few people to ever see the picture when it originally popped up on the internet. The interview goes south shortly after the narrator arrives to Mary's home, where they find her barricaded in her room, rambling nonsense. The interview is dropped once the narrator realizes that there's no way he'll be able to get any answers from her. A year goes by and the narrator is contacted by Mary once again, where she apologizes for the botched interview. She goes on to explain her experience of coming into contact with the Smiledog image file, detailing about how ever since she saw the image, she's had nightmares where the creature torments her but pleads that he will leave her alone if she just spreads the word. A week after seeing the image for the first time, she received a floppy disk in the mail containing only one file. Mary then explains that the day the narrator came to interview her, she planned to pass on the floppy disk to them, but at the last minute changed her mind when she decided she wasn't ready to spread the word. She then pleads the narrator to give up their search for information and no longer look into the urban legend. A month after the narrator was contacted by Mary, her husband reaches out to inform the narrator she committed suicide. Just when the story seems like it's come to an end and the trail has gone cold, the narrator receives one more email from an unknown sender, containing a single file attached to it. Needless to say, this is the best story we've discussed so far, and honestly, it conveys an interesting mystery and horror much more complex than a serial killer or ghost lady, taking many cues from Y2K era Japanese horror films like The Ring or One Missed Call. Smiledog itself has an almost Lovecraftian touch to it, since he's an unexplained force that haunts those who come into contact with them, slowly driving them insane. If you haven't experienced Smiledog yet, well, you should. Speaking of H.P. Lovecraft, it's time we talk about everyone's favorite Lovecraftian reject, Slender Man. Much like Jeff the Killer, he's an infamous character that served as the face of creepypasta since his creation, though his origins actually have nothing to do with internet horror stories. Slender Man was originally created by Eric Knudsen in 2009 for a contest on Something Awful. Eric created 2 photoshopped images of the creature, obscured in the background of old Polaroids. When the character was first created, he was nothing like what he ended up becoming. Originally, Slender Man was a much more aggressive monster, pursuing people, predominantly children, to abduct them. Though over time he became a much more calm and creeping force, stalking his prey in the distance for long periods of time, driving them insane and distorting their reality. With a stylish design and scary concept, it didn't take long for fans to start making their own images of Slender Man and writing creepypastas based on him. My personal favorite of these would have to be the story Tiki Toby. But Slender Man is actually best known for reasons outside of creepypasta, mostly the web series based on him and the video games. There are tons of Slender games, but the most well known is the original Slender the 8 Pages. AKA that game every Let's Player pretended to be scared of back in 2012.
Shit! No! Go away! Shit!
The premise is simple. You're alone in a creepy forest, trying to pick up pages of drawings while avoiding Slender Man, who pursues you the entire time. If he catches you, you're rewarded with one of the lamest jump scares ever made. This YouTube content farm spawned countless games taking the same formula, and despite how lame it all was, it helped creepypasta blow up. Another thing that helped with all this though was the Slenderverse. Multiple web shows based around Slender Man like Everyman Hybrid, Tribe 12, and most importantly, Marble Hornets. These shows all varied in story and quality but kept a similar formula in how they portrayed Slender Man and how they presented their stories. Marble Hornets obviously being the giant of this sphere. Even having a terrible movie made about it. If you want to deep dive into any of these series, check out Nightmind's channel. He covered all these in great detail. With all this success, Slender became a household name, but there was a breaking point. And that was the tragic 2014 Peyton Leutner incident. An attempted murder when 2 12-year-old girls, Anissa Wire and Morgan Gazer, tricked Leutner into going into the forest with them under the guise of a game of hide and seek. These girls pinned down Leutner and stabbed her 19 times all over her body. They claim that their motive was to give a sacrifice to Slender Man in an attempt to become his proxies. Miraculously, Leutner survived and was discovered crawling on the road hours later. Wire and Gazer were later tried and sentenced to 25 years in a mental institution. I don't bring this tragedy up in order to drum up an old controversy, but to accentuate just how influential creepypasta had become, for both the good and bad reasons.
What did you do to the TV? Slender Man!
Ben Drowned is the apex of classic creepypasta. Nothing as high quality or interesting ever came before it, and even since, we have yet to see anything beat it. The story was extremely well written, and rather than just have a single image tied to it, Ben Drowned has screenshots, realistic gameplay videos corroborating the story, and connections to other uncanny internet applications. And to top it all off, the story played out in real time. It almost felt like an ARG, and for many, it was their gateway into the unfiction realm. Ben Drowned first began its run in September 2010 on 4chan's X-Board, where Anon began posting about his experiences buying a strange copy of Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. Creepy old man and bootleg card aside, Anon decided to play the game only to find a file already on it entitled Ben. It's not long before Anon describes some creepy and uncanny moments in the game that go against anything that's supposed to happen in the original. But what made this story special is that he posted gameplay videos of everything on YouTube on an account named JDucible. And before I spoil any more, I'm just gonna say some pretty creepy shit ensues, slowly driving JDucible to insanity. I'd like to say more, but out of any of the stuff I've covered in this video, this is the one you want to check out most. The less you know, the better. Ben Drowned made itself believable by having its story told in real time through 4chan posts, as well as the aforementioned screenshots and gameplay videos, which added a lot of believability. At the time, no one else had done something like that, and the idea of ROM hacks was still a very niche and unknown topic. Add in cleverbot conversations, esoteric gameplay videos from other games posted over a year before the story started, with dialogue that later corroborates with the story, and you have a recipe for success. Ben Drowned would inspire other great haunted creepypastas like Petscop, NES Godzilla, and Diminish. While most video game creepypastas are nothing but absolute cringe, full of hyper-realistic gore and protagonists so dumb you want to rip your eyes out, projects like Ben Drowned show just how amazing the concept can be if it's done correctly. Creepypasta had some humble and kinda cringe beginnings, spawning both amazing stories and crimes against literature. Whether it's the creepy chain letters, movie-worthy monsters, or genuinely great stories and ARGs that came from it. I know some of you might be asking why I didn't mention other very influential stories and characters, like The Rake, or the true origin of the genre, Ted the Caver. But there are way too many to mention in one video. Plus, Ted the Caver is worth more than just an honorable mention, and deserves a video all its own. But with that being said, subscribe, support me on Patreon, follow me on Twitter. I'll see you in the next video.
It's me, Madison Ray. Play up you pathetic little vampires.